Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a conversation with the Mutts. I'm one of your hosts, the Celtic Mutt,
And I'm Mrs. Mutt.
and tonight we are going to discuss both facts and conspiracies surrounding
The Titanic.
the Titanic. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. First, let's lay some groundwork as far as the size of this ship, because that will feed in later to some of the conspiracies.
I have the measurements.
You do have the measurements.
Yes. She was 882 feet and 9 inches long. At her widest point, she was 92 feet 6 inches in breadth, and she was 10 decks high.
And she was built in the Harland and
Wolf.
Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland. At the time, that was considered to be one of the, if not the world's largest shipyard.
They had to completely build the specialized dry docks and such to build these ships because they were the largest of the time.
That's true.
The three.
Yes, they were the largest. They are the Olympic class. They're known as the Olympic class ship cruise liners. The reason that they were known as the Olympic class was because her sister ship, the Olympic, actually debuted the year prior to the Atlantic being
to the Titanic.
That's what I meant. To the Titanic. I'm sorry. There were actually three, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
There was the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannia.
Yes.
They were all three, but the Olympic and the Titanic actually were in dry dock at the same time.
But the Olympic debuted a year in advance.
Yes.
And the first ship of this type of fleet is what they named that fleet for.
Correct. That, and thus the reason that it is known as the Olympic class. J.P. Morgan actually pretty much funded that whole venture, I believe.
I don't know about that.
I know he was very influential in it.
I don't remember hearing that, but I may be wrong.
Anyway,
I do know that he was supposed to board the ship along with Astor and the others.
Right.
And at the last minute changed his plans.
Correct.
And there's rumors about, was he sick? Was it because of the laws in France that had been governing how the art was being sent back, shipped out?
Right. They were getting ready to pretty much outlaw shipping art out of France to the United States. So it is rumored that J.P. Morgan, who had a sizable amount of art that he was trying to get shipped back to the States, stayed behind. That too will feed into a conspiracy a little later on, folks. To be quite honest, the sinking of the Titanic was a comedy, if you will, pardon the pun, of errors. This thing had more errors than Carter had liver pills, if you catch my drift. There were 850 bottles of whiskey on board the ship. No, 850 cigars on the ship. That's what it was. 1,200 bottles of whiskey and something like 21,000 bottles of beer. But there were no binoculars on board.
Well, it's not that they weren't on board.
They weren't accessible.
They weren't accessible.
Correct.
The man that had the key for them had been on board, and there were sudden personnel changes, and everybody got knocked down a rank.
Right.
And he had too much experience to be knocked down to the rank that he would have been knocked down to.
Basically,
so
third mate.
He was moved to another ship. And in the rush to get off the Titanic, he took the key
or the binoculars that had been in the
to the cabinet or closet, whichever you want to call it, where all the binoculars were kept.
Actually, there was one set. It was only one set, and it was a set that was kept in the crow's nest.
It was the set that those in the crow's nest would have used.
Yes, and that was the only set that they found later. That was the only set on board. I did a little research without you, dear. I'm sorry.
So even the passengers didn't have any?
Apparently not. And even if they had, they would have been like the opera style glasses. And so they would not have been magnified enough to see out far enough for them to see the gash or the iceberg prior to the gash.
They wouldn't have seen the water at the base of the iceberg. Hey, Angel, his Angel. Hi, Kimber's Adventures. Hi, Bears. Hi, Captain Dan Kiwi. Hi, Slevin Up Insider.
Well, and by the way, that's a new name for me.
Yeah, I'm not
so
familiar.
Welcome. I did not. I saw that you had messaged earlier and did not get a chance to say anything. So welcome to the channel. There was supposed to be a master servicegram that had gone to the captain, whose name was John Smith. Oddly enough, that should have given him enough warning about the icebergs that was never delivered. There were it was the 5th, I believe.
That is a little hairy, because the man that worked in the telegram office or whatever you call it says that he took it to the bridge and gave it to an officer, but cannot identify in any way, shape, or form the officer that he gave it to. So there's no way for him to prove who he gave it to.
Now, the other thing was that they had plenty of warning about the iceberg, the ice field that they were coming into, because of the number of messages sent
from
by
the California and others. Yes.
Right. But the thing was, the radio man on the Titanic had gotten to the point where he was so annoyed because he was also trying to transcribe
personal messages. Sorry.
He was also trying to transcribe messages from passengers back to shore, and he finally, after like the fifth or sixth time, told them to just shut up and piss off. They got upset. The California got upset and turned off its transponders.
I don't know exactly what he said, but he was
basically.
He said they interpreted it as rude and turned off their radio.
Yeah, basically.
So, and in the long run, that screwed the Titanic over, because the California was the closest ship.
And they were what? 4 hours away?
No, Carpathia.
The Carpathia was 4 hours away.
Was roughly 4 hours away. And it took the Titanic roughly 3 hours to sink.
Correct.
And the California, I think, was 2 hours.
Yeah. They had been sending out messages basically all night, talking about various ice fields that were, or icebergs. I keep saying ice fields, forgive me, that were out there. And like I said, the radio man on the Titanic was just feeling overwhelmed and swamped. So, turning off your transponder when that's a big no-no on a ship, because anytime an SOS goes out, you're supposed to, the law of the sea at that time, and I think still even now, is no matter what, you're supposed to try to respond to that. So if you turn off your transponder, you're kind of,
I think someone would have gotten raked over the coals for that.
I think they actually did, I believe, get raked over the coals. They did have to appear before the Board of Inquiry a year later to answer for why they had turned off their transponders. You know, just like I said, a comedy of errors. How many passengers were actually on board that ship?
Well, that's something I actually wanted to get into because there were 2,240 souls aboard the ship. That's passengers and crew total. Now, normally on a maiden voyage, these ships are at full capacity.
Right.
That is not full capacity for the Titanic.
No.
But because there was a coal strike, it caused many of the travelers to postpone their trip. The actual total accommodations for the Titanic at full capacity was 2,453 passengers. That's just the passengers. That's not counting crew. For that was 833 in first class, 614 in second class, and 1,006 in third class. The actual breakdown of of those that were aboard the ship, there were 324 in first class, so not even half of the available.
First class was on board.
Right. There were 284 in second class. Again, not even half of the space was taken. And 709 in third class. So 70% of the capacity of third class was filled.
Now, they believe that a large part of that was due to because of a coal strike that was going on at the time. A lot of passengers had either postponed their trip or canceled. It was originally supposed to, the launching should have had a full crew, a full complement of passengers and crew, but because of the coal strike, a large percentage of them did cancel.
Right. And something else to keep in mind is that the shipyard took advantage of the coal strike as best as they could, because these other shipyards or cruise lines, pardon me.
The White Star Line, you mean, took advantage?
Yeah, White Star Line took advantage. I'm sorry.
And the White Star Line was the line that owned the Britannia, the Olympic, and the Titanic.
And the only ship that was going out at that point was the Titanic. That was the only ship going to port, in port. For passengers.
It was the only one going. It was the only one making a voyage. Yes. Yeah.
They had taken advantage of the strike,
right,
by buying all the coal from other ships that had canceled their voyages.
Correct. So the White Star Line was bulking up on its coal, which technically was a really smart move, considering they were trying to debut this ship, the ship that was its own lifeboat.
Yes, they actually built it that way.
Yeah, they actually built it as
they did.
And that was the other thing. They also built it, and I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. They also built. There was a misnomer. There's a misnomer that it was thought to be that it was billed as the unsinkable Titanic. The way it was actually billed was the nearly unsinkable,
or virtually unsinkable.
Virtually or nearly, yeah.
They had their legal teams even at work back then.
So even then they were, yeah, exactly. She's crawling into my head, folks. Make her get out.
Hey, you got into mine earlier.
That's true, I did. So they knew what they were doing. They knew the game they were playing. They knew that it was not completely an unsinkable ship. There were 16 bulkheads that ran the length of the bottom of the ship, the bow of the ship, that each one was airtight, and they believed that as long as there were only 4 of them that were contained, if the ship was struck, that the ship could stay afloat.
we came across things that said 6 or 5 were breached.
Yeah, but I'm thinking it was more 4 because that's literally a quarter of the.
Right, but there were reports that said if 4 became breached, it could stay afloat.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Right. What we came across was reports that 5 or 6
actually were flooded.
Actually were breached.
Yeah, the number of actual breached bulkheads is in question, but it was believed that so long as it was only 4.
We can tell you, I came across.
And the other thing was that she was ill-equipped for lifeboats, which was a huge. But they rated back then. They rated the lifeboats.
Oh yeah,
by tonnage, by not by the number of passengers, but by the tonnage of the ship.
Right, because the governing board didn't just deal with passenger ships. They dealt with, and I actually found 2 different estimates on the gash. One was 300 feet. The other was 350 feet.
And by gash, we are not talking about Queenie, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about the gash in the boat.
Yes, the gash under the waterline from the iceberg.
Yes. So what was the numbers on that again?
On the gash, the length of the gash. Mm-hmm. One was 300 feet. The other one said 350. Now, the problem here as well, what led to one of the theories, at least, of what led to the gash, is that most of the hull had steel rivets, which was great. Those were fine. But those steel rivets could only go into the hull where it was straight because of the machinery they used to put them in.
Correct.
Where the hull was curved, you had to put those rivets in manually. And to do that, you couldn't really use the steel rivets.
No.
So they had to use cast iron.
Which is far more brittle than steel.
Yes. And for some reason, White Star Line chose to use something called best number 3 wrought iron as opposed to best number 4 wrought iron. Had the slag existed in the number 3 rivets ran horizontal, it would have helped to strengthen the rivets. Unfortunately, research shows the slag ran vertical, helping to weaken these rivets and allowing the heads to shear off more easily. If the slag had just gone the other way, it would have actually strengthened the rivets and it would have made it more difficult.
Yeah. The other thing was it also made them far more brittle. And the water that night was at, what did we discover?
Yes.
I believe it was at 20.
The water was estimated to be 28 degrees Fahrenheit.
And
salt water freezes at 28.4 degrees Fahrenheit.
So those rivets would have been extremely, extremely brittle.
If it gives you any idea as far as we go, people can only survive that temperature for about 30 minutes in the water.
Yeah.
After that, they deal with, you start suffering hypothermia, cardiac arrest, or other cold water shock related effects.
Yeah.
Only 44 to 48 people who fell into the water actually made it out alive. Mm-hmm. And most of those were pulled into lifeboats very quickly after going into the water.
It said that only the number of survivors of the total number was 705 escaped to the boats, reportedly. That works out to about 1/3 on board surviving. So literally only about 1/3 of the people that were on the ship survived. They were taken to Halifax, Nova Scotia from once the Titanic not the Titanic, I'm sorry. Once the California and the
Not
Carpathia.
the California.
That's right.
The California never got the radio signal.
Okay,
so
that's
they
right.
never came.
They never did show up. Once the Carpathia arrived, they actually started to.
Now,
Captain Starlink, how are you?
I wanted to point out, you said 705 survived via lifeboat.
Yeah, that's what.
Right.
Well, that was what was
Right.
reported.
They had 14 lifeboats that held 65 people each. There were 2 emergency seaboats that held 35 people each, plus 4 collapsibles that held 49 people each. That's a total of 1,176 people that should have been saved.
Yeah, which would have been roughly half of the number of people that were there.
And they got a third of them because
well,
they didn't. The crew didn't know that the boats had been tested properly.
The boats weren't tested properly.
No,
they weren't tested properly. They didn't do.
The lifeboats had been.
Oh, the lifeboats had been, but they didn't run,
do the lifeboat drill. The lifeboat drill was scheduled for the morning that the boat was struck by the iceberg, the morning of April 14th of 1912. Captain Edward John Smith canceled the drill before the tragedy occurred. One theory is that Smith wanted to have one final Sunday service before retiring. His journey on the Titanic was to be his last before retiring.
Yeah, it was supposed to have been his very last
voyage.
Yeah, he was known as the captain to the millionaires. There were people who would literally reschedule their trips once they found out that Smith was going to captain a boat to sail under him. He'd never been found guilty of any negligence.
Yet he failed his navigation test. At least I'm assuming he took it multiple times.
He did take it multiple times, yes.
But yes, the first time he took it, he failed his navigation test.
Yep. So there, again, as I said a moment ago, comedy of errors. Go ahead.
I was going to go back to the numbers for just a minute. Of all of those people aboard, those 2,240 souls aboard that ship, 107 of those kids were 107 of them were kids,
children, yeah.
And most of them were in third class.
Yes.
And only 45%, roughly, of the third class survived.
Yep.
While 97% of first class women survived.
Yep.
123 of the first class passengers were estimated to have died.
Yeah, the numbers are just absolute. There was so much miscommunication and just sheer negligence. It wasn't even funny. Smith essentially had a nervous breakdown, they believe, once he realized that the ship had been struck. And once he started giving the orders, the way he gave the orders, it was believed that only women and children were to get on the lifeboats, when in fact it was women and children first were to load the lifeboats, and then after that the men could load them.
But that really didn't happen anyway, because they did end up with men aboard.
Well, a few, yeah. There weren't a large number, but there was,
Speaking of women,
yes,
yeah, I know we've all heard of Molly Brown,
the unsinkable Molly Brown, played by
Kathy Bates
in the movie Titanic in 1997.
Well, there apparently was another woman who was unsinkable. Her name is Violet Jessup. She survived the crash of the Olympic in 1911, so the Titanic's sister ship. which, by the way, the Olympic was indeed involved in a crash and was uninsurable and unusable because of that crash.
And that will also come into the conspiracy section in just a little bit.
She survived the sinking of the Titanic in 1912.
Yep. And
she survived the sinking of the Britannic in 1916. She was an ocean liner stewardess and a nurse in the early 20th century. We actually looked, and I forget, I want to say she was born in 1887, and I know she died in 1971.
A year after I was born.
Yes.
So, yeah. Now, here's another, since we're going to talk about the ladies for a moment, what about, what was it, Vivian?
Yes. Yes, I have her name.
Yes.
No, it's where is she?
She was the youngest, at 10 weeks old, she was the youngest passenger.
Milvina Dean.
That's it.
She was the youngest passenger on the ship. She when she boarded, she was 10 weeks old.
Yep.
They never found her father's body. She was at age 97 when she died in 2009. She, at that point, was the last surviving passenger.
Yep, in 97 when she passed. Yep. So the youngest was also the last survivor.
That's kind of mind blowing.
Yeah, that is a little bit mind blowing. So as far as when the Titanic herself was built, again, we're talking the late 19th century, and things were not as modernized as they are. Actually, the earliest 20th century. I'm sorry, the earliest 20th century. I stand corrected on that. They were not as modernized as they are now. So you would have thought the casualty count would have been astronomical, when in actuality, only 8. And I don't mean to dismiss the number by saying only, but 8 people died in the construction of the Titanic, but only 5 were known. Those 5 are Samuel Scott, John Kelly, William Clark, and James Dobbins, as well as Robert Murphy. Those are the known 5 that were killed in the construction of the supposed great unsinkable ship, the Titanic. It's just, I know I've said it a half dozen times, but it just blows my mind at the number of just errors in judgment that,
Well, and it wasn't, to be honest, it wasn't just White Star and the manufacturing at Harland and Wolff. The life vests or life belts that they had were made of canvas and cork and tied on. They passed inspection, believe it or not, but they were found to be flimsy, and they may have actually aided in some passengers losing their lives, even though they did pass inspection.
Canvas is heavy once it gets wet.
Yeah.
I can't understand using canvas before.
I don't know.
Now, I understand that they may not have had another. Plastics were not heavily used at that time.
Right. And you were talking about the board that did the review of everything.
Yeah, the Board of Inquiry.
No, before the ship sailed.
I don't remember.
Okay. They are the ones that said how many lifeboats.
Oh, the inspector, she's talking about the Safety Inspection Board, where they were supposed to have a certain number of lifeboats, which was gauged on the tonnage, done by tonnage, and not by the number of passengers.
Right. Well, let me see.
Now, we've already stated that there were 16 lifeboats and 4 other boats.
The Titanic's original design called for 64 lifeboats. but the number was later cut in half, then nearly halved again. The chief designer, Alexander Carlisle, originally planned for 3 lifeboats on each davit. However, the number was eventually reduced for cosmetic reasons to make the decks look less cluttered. Like I said, they had the 14 that held 65 people, the 2 emergency seaboats, and the 4 collapsible. So there is where you come up with the 20. They were only required to have 16.
Yeah. Carlisle, while I believe it was Carlisle, that he, and this ties into the politics of the day. We don't do politics, but it does tie into it. There was a great deal of strife between the Protestants and the Catholics, and he wasn't big on that either way. But because a large number of the workforce was Irish Catholic, when they started wanting to know who was going to go aboard we'll do, Angel. We'll get in touch with you after. He ended up being threatened. And this was something I caught while one morning while you were sleeping. I was kind of trying to get, and they ended up running him and his wife out of their home and into the countryside of Ireland, and he ended up walking away from the whole project when they cut the number of lifeboats to 16.
Oh, to the 20?
To the 20, yeah, he walked away. And he never designed another ship after that.
I don't blame him. I mean,
he walked away. He was staunchly against them cutting it down to 16. It was later proven that he was not the villain in this, not really the villain in this story. He wanted them to have. Not necessarily. They didn't necessarily need to have the maximum number.
64.
They didn't need, but he was in favor of, what was it, 48?
Yes,
I believe
he was from 64. This says it was cut in half, but I know they had talked on one of the things we had looked at. They had talked about 48.
Yeah, and I believe that was the number that he was willing to compromise on, was to 48. Which but they were so worried about the aesthetics of the Titanic and the
deck space
in the first class having their visibility blocked. They didn't give a damn about
the walking space.
Yeah, they didn't give a damn about security,
safety.
About the safety. So, I mean, she was a lavish ship, don't get me wrong. Her stairwell ran from 7 decks?
Something like that.
Yeah.
And that I can't remember what hotel, but that grand staircase was designed after a hotel
in England. Yeah, it was in London. The Ritz Carlisle.
Was that it?
Yep, it was okay. It was the Ritz Carlisle. Their staircase was designed after the.
It was a very lavish.
It was a very lavish stairwell. Indeed, it ran for, and I do remember it being, and that may not be right. It may not be the Ritz Carlisle. It may just be the Carlisle. I don't remember, but I do remember it being 7 decks. I do remember them saying that.
Going back to the classes, we all know how lavish everything was for first class.
I think our foodie's getting ready to tap into some things here.
A little bit, yeah. But this is the first time I was fascinated by this. This is the first time I have heard what the third class received.
Right.
In most cases on other vessels, third class was bring your own food.
BYOF.
So, I mean, most times you were looking at, say, this one was supposed to be a 6-day journey. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine packing food for you and your family
for 6 days?
For 6 days with no refrigeration, that's got to be safe.
Hardtack jerky.
Yeah, and
It
you've got to
would've-
be
yeah.
able to keep it safe from the rats
Yep.
and keep it
Mhm.
where it's going to be safe from if there's going to be anybody else in your room.
Yeah.
You know? But in the case of the Titanic, they actually fed the third class.
Yeah, it was
They did
I think
not
it was the only
actually-
one. I think it was the only ship in the White Star Line that fed the third class.
As far as I know. So for breakfast, third class was offered ham, eggs, smoked herring, fresh bread, oats, for lunch, more fresh bread, rice soup, roast beef, something called cabin biscuits, which
Really looked more like
looks
crackers.
looked like some sort of crackers. Yes, plum pudding, fruit, and sweet sauce.
Fresh fruit. Let me clarify that. Fresh fruit.
They were not offered dinner.
No.
Dinner was seen as something suitable for only the upper class. That said, they were offered afternoon tea. Afternoon tea consisted of cheese with fresh bread, cold meats, cabin biscuits, figs, rice, and porridge. On the day the iceberg struck, this afternoon tea was the last meal of 75% of the third class passengers.
That's crazy. That is crazy to me. What do we have the time that the iceberg struck the?
I didn't note it, but I can look it up.
I
Very
believe
quickly.
it was like
2 something in the morning.
2 something in the morning. Yeah, and the first ship didn't arrive for like
4 hours.
4 hours. Yeah, and they were finding dead bodies floating in the water. It was an astronomically horrific scene that was mind-blowing for its time. It would be mind-blowing now.
The Titanic hit an iceberg at 11:40
That's
p.m.
what it
on
was.
April 14th, 1920, or 1912. I'm sorry. The ship was traveling at a speed of 22.5 knots, which is less than 1 knot below its top speed of 23 knots. The Titanic sank at 2:20 a.m. on April 5th, 1912, about 2 hours and 40 minutes after hitting the iceberg.
And didn't we discover that Smith was running the ship at full speed?
Just under full speed.
Just under full speed? Yeah,
in
he continued
hopes of impressing people.
Yeah.
There's rumors.
They were going for the speed
There's
record.
people that say they heard Ismay advising Smith to speed up.
Yeah.
This was faster than what the recommended speed for the Titanic was.
Yeah, they were again trying to. I believe it was the year before the Olympic had broken the speed record, if I'm not mistaken. I believe that was something I heard in one of the videos, and Ismay wanted to, and he was one of the
Olympic.
Yeah.
The Olympic, the sister ship of the Titanic?
Yeah.
The year
prior. Wasn't that the one that was launched the year before?
Yes, but it was once it got
Maybe
damaged.
maybe I'm incorrect about which ship it was, but
Okay.
there was a ship that had the year. I do know it was the year before, and I may be wrong about it being the Olympic. That had broken the speed record, and Ismay wanted that.
Okay, I would just know that.
Yeah. So
from what I understand, the Olympic got into its accident before it even really got out of the harbor.
Right, but they ran into the HMS
the Hawk.
Yeah, the HMS Hawk, which was a naval vessel
And it was deemed that it was White Star Line's fault for
Yes.
that accident.
Yeah.
So insurance would not pay for the damage. And like I said, the Olympic was uninsurable and unusable.
Yeah. So maybe I was incorrect about which ship it was, but I do know that it was the year before that a ship had broken the land, or not. I want to say the land speed record, but I mean the speed record. Yeah, the fastest boat in the ocean and on land. Yeah, it just, yeah. Now I've lost my train of thought, folks. I'm sorry. Mutt is correct. It was the Olympic.
Okay, Kimber, thank you.
So yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of crazy things that are tied into this. There are even conspiracies that we kind of tapped into. Yes.
You're gonna have to forgive me. My Dexcom is warning me.
Just go take care of your business. Yeah, just a lot of things. Like it was said, I'm going to get into the conspiracy for a minute here while Mrs. Mutt is taking care of her
reading the chocolate.
Her issue here. Part of the conspiracy was that J.P. Morgan, who, as we said earlier, did not board the ship, had a hand in some way of sinking the ship because of three of his
I know it was Astor. Was it Wells or was it Fargo?
It was Wells. It was
okay.
Wells.
And then there was another one, yes, but I don't remember who.
There were three that opposed. He wanted to introduce the
reserve.
Yeah, the monetary reserve, and he knew that these three men opposed it. So it's believed in certain conspiracy circles that he had it sunk in hopes of getting rid of these three men, thereby bringing in the IMF, the International Monetary Reserve. So, that's one conspiracy. There's another conspiracy that says that it wasn't actually the Titanic that was sunk, but rather the Olympic, and that they had changed the name. They had basically swapped names, which was, from what they said back then, fairly easy to do and not so uncommon.
But there was
with the strike going on, there were not as many people in the yard. It would have been relatively easy to just swap they didn't need to swap plates or silverware because the White Star Line used the same plates and silverware and glassware across the board on all ships. They just would have had to basically repainted and swap the names.
That being said, there was a number engraved into a part of the ship.
The bulkhead.
The Olympic was, what was it, 103?
No, 40, I think it was
401.
401. It was either 400 or 401, and Titanic was the opposite. I think Olympic was.
I think the Olympic was 400,
and Titanic was 401. That's what it was. Yeah, that was the number, the way they numbered it for that year.
And if you look at Titanic under the water where she sits.
Yes, we did. It had a coal fire that was part of the coal that they had bought earlier, Kimber. There had been a fire that started down in the furnaces and had burned for several days before they were able to get it out.
I believe they were saying 3 weeks.
Was it 3 weeks? I couldn't remember. And they ended up actually turning the ship around so that passengers that boarded did not see the black marks that were just above the waterline from that fire, which they also believe made the steel more brittle, which would have affected it in the cold water. Those are 20-foot. Those were 20. I believe they were 20. Each sheet was 20 feet long and
I don't remember.
6 inches thick. 6 inches to a foot thick. That
the hull?
The hull.
It was an inch thick.
Was that what it was?
The hull was an inch thick.
Okay, that's not a very thick hull then.
1 inch thick steel plating. It did have over 3 million steel rivets.
Yeah, that was, yeah. So, yeah, we did run across that. That did tie into it. We just hadn't gotten to that part. So, yes.
They're saying that when they looked at the ship down below, the plating was pushed outward.
Yeah, that was.
If it was struck by something externally, it should be pushed inward.
Yeah, there's belief that
there may have been an explosion
on board
because of the bunker fire.
Yeah, because of the bunker fire.
That it reacted to the water and resulted in an explosion.
Yeah. Because, like she just said, the steel was pushed out, and then an explosion. It's not going to blow inward. It's going to blow out. So, and that fire had raged for
3 weeks.
3 weeks. Yeah.
It didn't so much rage.
It smoldered. I shouldn't say rage. I misspoke again. It smoldered.
It's like that city in Pennsylvania
which we will talk about. Centralia.
Yes.
Centralia, Pennsylvania. Now you know what next week's topic is. Centralia, Pennsylvania, and the coal fire that has burned for 5 decades now, and they had to actually evacuate the entire town. So you now know what next week's topic is as well.
Another thing that you wanted to point out was that for whatever reason, the Titanic did not undergo the normal 2-day sea trial. Yeah,
it did not. And I don't recall why, or even they even mentioned why they didn't.
I don't remember that part. And I just wanted to.
Yeah, it needed to be mentioned that the sea trials were not done prior to her maiden voyage. And it was not a very elaborate. I thought it was another thing. I thought was rather a unique thing. It wasn't a big grandiose launching. They basically had the ship sail out of the slip. They didn't do the bottle break. They didn't. It was a very non-ceremonial. So why was that?
Yeah.
There's a lot of conspiracists out there that wonder if it wasn't done on purpose.
You also wanted to point out that it's broken into 3 pieces on the bottom of the Atlantic.
It was believed initially that it was only 2. As of, I believe it was 2009, when they sent a submergible down, they found that the ship actually broke up into 3 separate pieces. Excuse me, which that's really not here nor there. I just kind of thought it was interesting. And I have to wonder if that's due to the amount of water that was being forced.
Were they hiding something?
I believe so. I believe that but as Mrs. Mutt will call me quite frequently, as she's patting me on the head, I am her little conspiracy theorist. So, take everything that I say with a grain of salt, do your own research as far as the conspiracies go. We've done quite a bit of research, but there's just some things that for me don't add up. So, I kind of got into looking into this probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, just kind of out of curiosity. And it just kind of has turned into what we've got tonight.
You had also wanted to bring up Paddy the Pig Fenton.
Paddy the Pig Fenton. I'm trying to remember.
He worked at the shipyard.
Yes. Paddy the Pig. I don't remember what it was about him.
He released some information.
Yeah, he did.
I don't remember what.
Yeah, he released some information talking about how it goes back to them swapping the boat. He was
I
actually,
thought it was about the fire.
you know what? He was the fireman down in the. He was. You're right. He was the fireman, and he said that it had been smoldering, and that there was definite damage done to the hull that had, for some reason or other, not initially been reported. So yeah, there's that. I was getting my some of my facts confused there, folks. Forgive the chemo brain. I'm sorry. So what else did we have?
Well, that was pretty much everything. But you're around
Conspiracies.
Yeah.
What do you all think? Did it strike the iceberg and that was what caused it? Was it a combination of things? Was it done intentionally? I'm curious to hear what you all think.
I know I came across a theory that it was done. It was damaged intentionally, but it got out of hand. That it was sunk, based on insurance.
Yeah, well,
to recover some of the money, to recoup some of the money
from the Olympic.
From the Olympic, because they had to pay out of pocket for the damage between the Olympic and the Hawk.
Yeah. Yeah, they were also forced to pay out quite a bit for the Hawk too. So they were definitely
wanted
on
to
the
recoup
ropes.
Some of that.
Yeah, they were definitely on the ropes for that.
They were actually that is debunked because they were underinsured. The insurance that they had, and I'm sorry if I'm having problems because I'm going hypo. I'm trying to prevent it by eating all this chocolate.
Would you like some juice?
That might not be a bad idea.
You keep talking, I'll be right back.
That is debunked because they were not only not insured enough for the Titanic, they were not insured enough to cover the Olympic. So, and the Olympic, like I said, was unusable and uninsurable because of the damage it had sustained and caused with the accident with the Hawk. So there wasn't enough insurance on anything to cover any damage that was done. Thank you. If I had thought about it, I would have grabbed a Pepsi, but juice is actually going to be better for me. I'm just looking over my notes. We discussed the size, the life vest.
They dropped the anchors to. No, that was a different story. Never mind. That was a different story altogether.
I do know. I can't think of their names. I believe they owned Macy's at the time. If I remember correctly, she was not willing to board the lifeboat without him. And they went back to their cabin and just held each other as they waited for the end to come. I know I wasn't able to find it in my research, but I know I have been told by a good friend that there was indeed a family in third class that they tucked the kids into bed and told them stories and waited for the end. So, I mean, I know that there were people that did their best to face at the end bravely in any way that in the ways that they knew how. I do know that Captain Smith had over 40 years of experience at sea. They don't know where he was when he met his end. Some believe he was on the bridge. Others believe he went back to his cabin. But he did indeed go down with the ship. And again, yes, that's it. Isidore and Ida Strauss. They were co-owners of Macy. Thank you, Kimber. I appreciate that. I was thinking Strauss, but I wasn't positive on the name. And I could not think of Isidore and Ida for their first names. The area that the iceberg struck was part of that curved area of the hull where the rivets were put in manually versus they were the cast iron number 3 best rather than the number 4, which would have been better, and they were definitely not the steel rivets that would have been put in mechanically. So I don't know if it was just a money-saving technique that they thought, that the number 3 would do just as good for them as the number 4, and so they would just save the extra funds. That's what I'm suspecting. Is it was just a way to cut corners. But the hull was 1-inch steel plating with over 3 million steel rivets. I don't know how many of the cast iron rivets. Oh, that's good. I'm glad Ida made sure that her maid, Ellen Bird, took her place in the lifeboat. That's good. Like I said, I thought it was very interesting to know what the third class got to eat. From what I understand, what I read was the actual menu for the day the iceberg struck. So, I mean, we know how lavish first class was treated. I found it very interesting to know what third class received. So I found that fascinating. I don't know if anybody else thought that was interesting or not. Hey, Mutt.
Hey,
You're back.
Yeah, I had to step away briefly. I'm sorry, folks. Something needed to be taken care of, and I was the only one that could
do it.
I was the only one that could do it.
You're the man.
I am the man.
Thank you for getting me the juice.
You're very welcome. Well, ladies and gents, it has been 1 hour. I hope that you have found this interesting. I know we did doing the research on it. Again, we're going to do Centralia. How were they fed? You want to go over that again real quick?
Do you mean what were they allowed to, what were they given to eat, Angel? I believe it would just be buffet style.
Yes, Kimber, they were there. They actually died aboard the ship.
Yes, I had brought them up, and I couldn't remember their names.
Yes.
So she was giving me their names.
Yeah, they
and she
they died
pointed out that I made sure that her maid, and she gave me her maid's name, got aboard one of the lifeboats.
Yeah, I hadn't found the maid's name, but yes, they refused. He refused to go, and she refused to go without him. So they ended up going back to their cabin, and they died together in the cabin.
Yes. For breakfast, and like I said, I believe this was the actual menu for the day that the iceberg hit the ship. For breakfast, they had ham, eggs, smoked herring, fresh bread, and oats. For lunch, it was fresh bread, rice soup, roast beef, cabin biscuits, which looked to be some sort of crackers, plum pudding, fresh fruit, and sweet sauce. Again, there was no dinner, as dinner was seen to be suitable only for the upper classes. However, there was afternoon tea, which consisted of cheese with fresh bread, cold meats, cabin biscuits, figs, rice, and porridge. And that was the last meal for 75% of third-class passengers.
So
does that answer your question, Angel?
So that's how they were fed. Considering that most of I believe that the rest of the White Star Line, out of all the ships in the White Star Line, the Titanic was the only one to actually feed their third class. What was read off as their menu was none too shabby, really.
No,
not at all.
I know you were impressed with the roast beef.
I was. I'm not gonna lie. I was kind of impressed with
I was kind of impressed with the fact that they were giving them fresh fruit.
Yeah, that was impressive, and the fresh bread.
Yes,
and the fresh bread
and the figs.
Yeah. Well, well, folks. Again, I need to take care of Mrs. Mutt here, I think. And we have been live for just over an hour. We have thoroughly enjoyed having all of you join us. Look forward to the Centralia story next week. And if you have not already, please hit the like button. So we will see.
And the subscribe button.
And if you're not subscribed to us, first of all, shame on you. I'm kidding.
Make sure to hit that button now.
But don't forget to, go ahead and hit the button now. I mean, why not? And we will see you all next Tuesday at the same time, 8 Central. Excuse me, 8 Eastern, 7 Central. And that makes it like 5 out there on the West Coast. So until next week, or until I decide to go live, by all means, also go check me out being a goofball dancing to some weird music. Yes, there is a short of that. You might want to go check that out as well. Mutt is a bit of a goofball.
And I've been posting a few pictures of at least Trinity.
Yeah.
The others haven't been so cooperative.
Yes, the children have been a little less cooperative, but Trinity
especially Abby.
Yep. But all right, gang. Love all of you, and appreciate you beyond words. We will see you all next week.
Love you. Thank you for joining us.
Bye.